September 1940, somewhere on the coast of Scotland. The night is a solid thing, a damp black vault pressed low over the North Sea. The wind carries the salt tang of the Firth, and the only sound is the relentless push and pull of the tide on the shingle. A darker shape disrupts the water's rhythm. A rubber dinghy, black and silent, rises with a swell before grating onto the stones. Figure clad in oilskin struggles out, his breath pluming in the cold air. He drags the craft. Beyond the tide line, his movements efficient, rehearsed. He is Joachim, a name he will discard by morning. His heart hammers not from exertion, but from the sheer, terrifying significance of his mission. He is an agent of the Abwehr, Nazi Germany's formidable intelligence service. He carries a false identity, British currency, a wireless transmitter, sealed in waxed canvas, and in his mind, the locations of RAF airfields and coastal defenses. He is the vanguard of an unseen invasion, a needle sent to stitch secret maps for the Luftwaffe and the planned invasion, Operation Sea Lion. For a moment he stands on the enemy's shore, a solitary conqueror of the dark. Profound sense of confidence, instilled by his handlers in Hamburg, settles over him. Their training was thorough, their methods peerless. The British are blind, their security services a lethargic relic of a faded empire. The secrecy of the Abwehr is absolute. He is a ghost. He secures his kit and turns inland, following the mental map towards his first safe house. His boots crunch on the gravel. Then a new sound. Not the wind, not the sea. The distinct metallic scrape of a safety catch being released. The sound is calm. Deliberate. From behind a low stone wall, shapes detach from the deeper shadow. Not one, not two, half a dozen. They move without urgency, surrounding him. Torch beams snap on. Not blindingly, but with a firm, administrative glare, illuminating the stunned agent and the worried face of the civilian fisherman who had rowed him ashore. The man at the front wears a trench coat, his hat brim casting his eyes into shadow. His voice, when it comes, is quiet, almost courteous, carrying the flat tone of a London suburb. Joachim, is it, or do you prefer your new name? We've been expecting you. My colleagues from MI5 would like a word. In that instant, the Abwehr's boast of secrecy shatters on a Scottish beach. Joachim is not a predator in the dark. He is a fly, walking with infinite care directly into a web spun. Weeks before he ever left Germany, and he is not alone. Every single agent sent to Britain is walking an identical path, each step monitored, each transmission controlled. In the greatest counterespionage operation in history. This is the story of the double-cross system. The world of espionage in the late 1930s was a twilight realm of gentlemen, agreements, antiquated traditions, and looming, violent modernity. On the European continent, the shadow war was already raging. In Berlin, the Abwehr, the German military intelligence organization, stood as a formidable, if enigmatic, institution, under the command of Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, a complex and morally ambiguous figure. It projected an aura of supreme competence. Canaris, a U-boat commander from the last war, cultivated a network of agents and informants that stretched across the globe. Abwehr's headquarters at 7678 Terpitzufer in Berlin was a hive of activity, processing reports from Latin America, North Africa, the Balkans, and the United States. To the outside world and to the Nazi hierarchy, it was a bastion of secrecy and sophistication. Hidden arm of the resurgent Reich. Yet within its walls, contradictions festered. Canaris himself harbored deep reservations about Hitler and the path of the Nazi regime. His organization was a refuge for anti-Nazi conservatives and career officers, operating in a state of fragile tension with the party's own security apparatus, the SD under Reinhard Heydrich. This internal division created fractures, small cracks in the monolith of German intelligence through which misunderstandings and operational vanity could flow. The Abwehr's reputation, however, remained largely untarnished. It was a service that boasted of its subtlety. believing its ciphers unbreakable and its agents undetectable. Across the North Sea, the picture was starkly different. British intelligence was not a single entity but a collection of often feuding fiefdoms, the Secret Intelligence Service. MI6 handled foreign espionage from its headquarters at Broadway Buildings. The Security Service, MI5, was responsible for counterespionage and domestic security from its Warren-like offices in Wormhood Scrubs and later St. James's Street, signals. Intelligence was the domain of the Government Code and Cipher School at Bletchley. Park coordination was haphazard, budgets were meager, and the prevailing attitude in much of the government was one of distaste for the ungentlemanly business of spying. The looming threat was recognized by a few key figures, but the apparatus to confront a totalitarian intelligence offensive was, in 1939, barely nascent. This British vulnerability was not lost on Germany, with the outbreak of war on September 1, 1939, and especially after the fall of France in June 1940, the United Kingdom stood isolated. The Battle of Britain raged in the skies, but a parallel clandestine battle was set to begin on the ground for Adolf Hitler and his high command. The invasion of Britain, Operation Sea Lion, was a daunting but necessary prospect. Planning required precise, actionable intelligence, troop dispositions, factory locations, civilian morale, coastal defenses. The Luftwaffe needed target coordinates. The Abwehr was tasked with providing the eyes on the ground. They prepared to launch their agents, their trusted V-Männer, Vertrauensmänner, confidence men, into the British darkness, believing utterly in their own operational security and the fragility of their enemies' defenses. The stage was set for a clandestine blitzkrieg. Germany would deploy its secret army. Britain, seemingly unprepared and reeling from military defeat, would have to find a way to see the invisible, to catch ghosts. What happened next was not a story of lucky breaks, but the rapid, ruthless construction of a machine designed to do one thing: control every single move the enemy thought was secret. The German espionage offensive against Britain began not with subtlety, but with a desperate, chaotic rush. In the summer and autumn of 1940, following the Dunkirk evacuation and the fall of France, the Abwehr launched its first wave of agents. The methods of insertion were almost comically haphazard. Agents dropped by parachute into darkened fields, landed from submarines or fishing vessels on remote beaches, even smuggled in on civilian ferries from neutral Lisbon. They were a disparate group. Some were ardent Nazis, ideologically committed. Others were opportunists, adventurers, or coerced individuals with language skills or British contacts. Many were spectacularly ill-prepared. One early agent, arrested within hours of landing in Kent, was found to be carrying a German sausage, a military manual in German, and a quantity of Belgian francs, useless in wartime Britain. Another had sewn his Abwehr paymaster's receipt into the lining of his coat. Their tradecraft was OFTEN, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter. They used secret inks that were easily revealed by basic chemical tests developed in the First World War. They carried wireless sets that were bulky, required specific and easily detectable aerial setups, and operated on predictable frequencies. The Abwehr, for all its boasting, had made a critical error. Its training was theoretical, rooted in a continental context. It had not truly grasped the profound, insular unity of a Britain under existential threat. For Britain was no longer sleeping. The shock of 1940 had catalyzed a revolutionary mobilization of security. The country transformed into a fortress island, its population becoming the eyes and ears of its defense. The careless talk costs lives campaign was not just propaganda. It created a culture of pervasive vigilance. Every stranger was watched, every unusual light reported. The Home Guard, over 1 million strong, patrolled coastlines and villages. Furthermore, the technical and legal framework for counter-espionage had been rapidly and ruthlessly assembled. At the heart of this defensive web was MI5's B Division, led by the cerebral Chain. Smoking Guy Liddell, a former Army officer with a deep understanding of intelligence. Work Liddell presided over a small but brilliant team. There was Dick White, meticulous. An analytical, Tar Robertson, a charismatic former sea captain with an intuitive genius. For handling agents and the penetrating intellect of Masterman and Oxford Don, their first tool was the Radio Security Service, RSS, a network of voluntary interceptors. Mostly radio amateurs who blanketed the British Isles, listening for illicit transmissions. Before a German agent could even power up his set, the RSS was often already tuning to his expected frequency, guided by decrypted Abwehr handshake signals provided by Bletchley Park's penetration of the Abwehr's own ciphers, a source known as ISOS Intelligence Section Oliver Strachey. The second, equally vital, layer was postal censorship, every letter entering or leaving. The country was opened and examined by an army of linguists and experts, Secret Inc. Messages hidden in seemingly innocuous correspondence between agents and their controllers in neutral countries were routinely discovered and decoded. This gave MI5 not just names and addresses, but insight into Abwehr procedures, personalities, and intelligence requirements. The result was a near-total failure of the first German spy offensive. Agents were picked up within days, sometimes hours of arrival. They were traced through their clumsy inquiries, their foreign accents, or the simple fact that the address they had been given for a safe house had been under surveillance for weeks. The question for MI5, however, was what to do with them. The traditional and legally straightforward response was interrogation by MI5's interrogation center at Camp 20, the forbidding Lachmere House, under the formidable Colonel Tin I. Stevens, followed by the hangman's rope at Wandsworth Prison. By late 1940, the execution cells were busy. But within B Division, a more audacious idea was taking shape. What if, instead of terminating these agents, they could be used? What if an agent could be turned, convinced or coerced into working for the British, sending false information back to his Abwehr controllers, all the while believing he was a lone, successful spy? This was the genesis of what would become the double-cross system. It was a system born not of overwhelming strength, but of a desperate need to gain any advantage, to see the enemy's hand before it was played. It required a perfect alignment of organizational will, psychological insight, and technical control, and its first, fragile success would hinge on the capture of one man, a petty crook from Wales, who would prove that the impossible could be managed. A spy could be made to work, diligently and convincingly, for the very people he was sent to destroy. This radical idea moved from theory to practice in the damp, tense rooms of British intelligence, setting in motion a deception that would span the entire war, a game of mirrors where every German spy in Britain would become a British asset, and the Abwehr's prized secrecy would become its greatest vulnerability. The core of the double-cross system was not technology or strategy, but a deeply human, psychological transaction. It was a duel of wits and wills conducted in soundproofed rooms, a relationship built on a foundation of fear, pragmatism, and meticulously cultivated trust. On one side stood the captured agent, the psychological journey from Abwehr. Operative to double agent was a precipitous fall. One moment they were a clandestine warrior, a master of disguise. The next, they were in a bare interrogation room at Camp 20, facing the glacial, unnerving presence of Colonel Stevens. The choice presented was stark and brutally simple: the rope or cooperation. For many, ideology evaporated under the cold shadow of the gallows. The ardent Nazi, the romantic adventurer, often chose death, but others saw a different path. The opportunist, the coerced, the pragmatist recognized a chance to survive, even to thrive. Some, like the Polish airman Roman Garby-Czerniawski, codenamed Brutus, turned out of a deeper anti-Nazi patriotism, seeing double-cross as a way to continue fighting for Poland. The transformation was managed not by the interrogators at Camp 20, but by the Case officers from B Division. This was where the art of handling began, men. Like Thomas Tarr Robertson, head of B1A, the section running double agents, possessed an almost preternatural ability to read people. The agent was moved from the threat of execution to a carefully constructed environment of controlled normalcy. They were housed in safe houses, given a modest salary, provided with creature comforts. The handler became their sole point of contact with the world, their protector, their confessor, their only friend. This dependency was deliberate and powerful. The handler's task was to build a legend, a fictional life for the agent that was watertight. Every detail of their reported existence, from the price of a pint in a Portsmouth pub to the gossip of a factory worker, had to be meticulously fabricated and memorized. The agent had to internalize this fiction so completely that when they transmitted, their reports carried the authentic, mundane texture of real life. The handler provided the raw material for these messages, information that was either harmless truth or carefully crafted falsehood. It was a collaborative fiction, a sustained performance where the agent's life depended on the believability of his script. The relationship was a tense symbiosis. The agent knew he was being used, but he also knew his survival was tethered to his usefulness. The handler knew his asset was a traitor to his original cause, a man motivated by fear or gain, yet he had to trust him with the most sensitive deceptions. It was a bond of mutual suspicion and absolute necessity, the fragile human engine driving the entire, vast deception machine. The espionage war was fought not only in the mind, but in the microscopic and the electromagnetic spectrums. The Abwehr equipped its agents with an array of technical devices intended to secure their communications, many of which were rendered obsolete or turned into liabilities by British scientific intelligence. The German spy kit was a study in ingenious but flawed engineering for secret writing. They supplied their agents with chemical inks, often an organic compound like pyrimidine that required a developing agent to reveal. These were the same basic formulas from the previous war and British censors at the postal censorship depots, using standardized chemical testers, could detect them with routine efficiency. More advanced was the microdot, an entire page of text photographically reduced to the size of a typewriter's period and glued onto an innocuous letter. It was a brilliant concept, but its discovery by a sharp-eyed censor in 1941 gave MI5 not just the hidden message, but a profound insight into Abwehr priorities and methods. The centerpiece of an agent's equipment was the wireless transmitter. Typically, these were cumbersome suitcase sets, often based on pre-war Belgian or commercial designs. They required lengthy, visible aerial wires and drew significant power. More critically, each operator had a distinctive fist, a unique rhythm and style of tapping the Morse key as recognizable as a handwriting sample. The Radio Security Service, RSS, with its network of interceptors, could fingerprint a transmitter from its first transmission. Once an agent was captured and turned, his fist had to be perfectly replicated by a British operator to avoid raising suspicion. This led to the creation of clandestine transmitting stations in houses around London, where MI5's own radio operators, like the legendary Leonard Len Burt, spent their nights meticulously impersonating the tapping styles of captured spies. Britain's technical dominance, however, stemmed from integration and forensic science. At Bletchley Park, the ISOS decrypts of Abwehr signals provided the daily itinerary of German intelligence, their questions to agents, their assessments of reports, their administrative chatter. This allowed the 20 Committee, so named because the Roman numeral XX symbolized a double cross, to craft replies that were not just believable but precisely tailored to what Berlin wanted and needed to hear. Meanwhile, the MI5 laboratory, under the direction of Dr. Edward Nobby Clark, became a forensic hub. Every item found on a captured agent, a button, a pencil, a slice of bread from his sandwich, was subjected to intense scrutiny. Where was the ink? Manufactured, what was the thread count of the clothing, the isotopic composition of the water in a flask could hint at a region of Europe. This forensic archaeology built comprehensive picture of Abwehr logistics and training schools. It also allowed MI5 to improve, and agents reported successes. A turned spy could send a sample of a new tank armor provided by British intelligence, claiming he stole it from a factory. The sample was real, but its composition would be subtly altered to mislead German metallurgists. In this war of shadows, British control was total, extending from the chemical structure of ink to the radio waves crossing the channel, turning every German tool into a conduit for British fiction. The success of Double Cross was as much an organizational triumph as an intellectual one. It pitted a streamlined, collaborative British system against a German intelligence apparatus riven by bureaucracy, suspicion, and ideological conflict. On the British side, the system was a model of inter-service coherence. At its heart was the 20 Committee, chaired by the Oxford historian J.C. Masterman. It met weekly, a clearinghouse for deception. Around the table sat representatives from MI5 running the agents, MI6 providing foreign intelligence, the military intelligence directorates of the Army, Navy, and Air Force, the Home Forces, and later, the Allied invasion planners. Here, the needs of the battlefield were translated into spycraft. A general needing to conceal troop movements in Scotland would task the committee. The committee would then instruct B1A, the MI5 section under Tar Robertson, which case officer should have which agent send what specific report. Information was shared openly, decisions were collective, and the overarching goal, strategic deception, was never subordinated to institutional vanity. This stood in stark contrast to the Abwehr. Under Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, it operated in a state of perpetual Cold War with the Nazi Party's own security service. The Sicherheitsdienst SD, under Reinhard Heydrich and later Ernst Kaltenbrunner. Rivalry, not cooperation, was the default. The SD viewed the Abwehr's officer corps as suspect, riddled with anti-Nazi conservatives. The Abwehr distrusted the SD's brutish methods and ideological fervor. Crucially, the Abwehr's own sections were compartmentalized. The officer in Hamburg running air intelligence agents had little contact with his colleague in Paris running army intelligence nets. There was no equivalent of the 20 Committee to cross-check reports to see that a spy in Britain reporting on naval installations was confirming details originally fed to a different spy reporting on airfields. This fragmentation was a critical vulnerability that the British exploited mercilessly. Piece of false information would be seeded through one turned agent, the Abwehr, eager for confirmation, would task another of its agents, unaware he was also controlled, to verify it. The second agent, guided by MI5, would duly confirm the story. The result was a closed loop of verification, a hall of mirrors where German intelligence was constantly confirming its own misconceptions. The British system was a single, disciplined orchestra, every instrument playing from the same score. The German system was a cacophony of soloists, each playing their own tune, unable to hear the collective false harmony being composed against them. The Abwehr's boast of secrecy was nullified not just by captured spies, but by its own dysfunctional structure, which the British manipulated with clinical precision. By 1943, the double-cross system was a well-oiled machine. Dozens of German agents, all under British control, were dutifully filing reports to their credulous Abwehr handlers. But the operation was about to ascend from tactical trickery to strategic masterpiece. The Allied planning for the cross-channel invasion, Operation Overlord, presented the ultimate test and the ultimate opportunity. The greatest threat to the landings at Normandy was not the Atlantic Wall, but the German Mobile Reserve, the Panzer divisions stationed in France. If they could be concentrated against the beachhead in the first 48 hours, the invasion could be driven into the sea. The Allied objective was stark. to convince Adolf Hitler and the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht, OKW, that the main assault would come not at Normandy, but at the Pas de Calais, the narrowest point of the English Channel, and that it would be led by a colossal, but entirely fictional formation, the First United States Army Group, FUSAG. This was the birth of Operation Fortitude, and the double-cross agents became its primary broadcasters. Their task was to construct, byte by wireless byte, the reality of FUSAG. The deception was architectural in its complexity. It required populating the southeast of England with a phantom army of 150,000 men, complete with its own commander, the famously aggressive General George S. Patton, its own logistics, its own chatter, and its own unmistakable signature of impending attack. The star performers of this grand fiction were the double-cross system's most trusted assets. Juan Pujol García, codenamed Garbo, was its undisputed maestro, a Spanish anti-fascist of dazzling audacity. Pujol had invented an entire network of 27 sub-agents across Britain, all figments of his imagination, and had so thoroughly deceived the Abwehr that they were funding his entire fictional operation. He became the linchpin, providing intricate, voluminous reports on FUSAG's order of battle. Roman Garby Czerniawski Brutus, the Polish patriot, fed corroborating details from his position within Allied military circles. Duško Popov, Tricycle, a wealthy Yugoslav playboy, used his high society access to drop hints about Patton's looming command. The physical deception dovetailed perfectly with the agent's reports. Across Kent and East Anglia, the landscape itself was enlisted. Inflatable rubber tanks and trucks, constructed by film studio set designers, were arranged in fields under camouflage netting that looked convincing from aerial reconnaissance height, but would sag tellingly to a low-flying pilot. Wooden landing craft sat in estuaries, empty camps, buzzed with the recorded sounds of vehicle traffic and soldiers, broadcast from loudspeakers. Real radio units maintained a constant and entirely fake traffic load, consistent with a massive headquarters gearing for action. Every German intelligence requirement was met with a carefully crafted lie. If Luftwaffe reconnaissance spotted real troop movements in the southwest, the actual build-up for Normandy, the double-cross agents were primed to explain them away as training exercises for a secondary diversionary force. The sheer volume, consistency, and sourced nature of the intelligence flowing to Berlin from their trusted spies created an impenetrable fog of conviction. The Pas de Calais was not just a possible target in the German mind, shaped relentlessly by their own turned agents. It became the only logical target. The Normandy defenses, while strengthened, would be left to bear the initial blow alone, while the mighty 15th Army and its panzer reserves waited, eyes fixed on the wrong horizon for an attack that would never come. The tension within the secure rooms of MI5 and the Allied deception staff in the spring of 1944 was a palpable physical force. The entire 5-year edifice of the double-cross system now rested on a single, imminent moment. Would the German high command believe the fiction until it was too late? The final act of the deception was a masterpiece of timing and nerve. In the days leading up to June 5th, the controlled agents entered their most critical phase. Their transmissions were calibrated to a state of heightened, but not frantic activity. They reported the final stages of FUSAG's preparation, last-minute unit movements to embarkation ports, a tightening of security, a palpable sense of impending action in the southeast. The goal was to paint a picture of an army coiled to strike, but not one on the immediate brink. The real invasion force, thousands of ships and over 150,000 men, was already moving into position for Normandy. Any report of this colossal activity in the west had to be neutralized. Agent Brutus, for instance, sent a message explaining that the significant wireless silence from the genuine invasion forces in the southwest was a standard security precaution for a large-scale training exercise. Then came the night of June 5, 1944. as the real armada churned through the rough seas of the Channel. The deception entered its most delicate, dangerous hour. The double-cross agents had to walk a razor's edge. To go silent would itself be a signal. To report the true, massive activity would be catastrophic. Their solution was a ballet of half-truths and strategic delays. Juan Pujol Garbo performed his greatest role at 3 a.m. on June 6th with Allied paratroopers already dropping over Normandy and the first landing craft approaching the beaches. Garbo's Mi-5 radio operator tapped out a message to Madrid. It was urgent but deliberately timed to arrive too late. In it, Garbo reported with apparent alarm signs of a major naval movement from ports in the southwest, but he framed it cautiously, suggesting it might be a diversion, and reiterating that his sub-agents in Kent and East Anglia still reported FUSAG as the primary threat. This message was a work of genius. It protected Garbo's credibility. He could not be seen to have missed the invasion entirely, while its delayed transmission and ambiguous content ensured it could not trigger an alert in time to affect the landings. The true test came in the hours and days after the first Allied soldiers waded ashore at Omaha, Utah. Gold, Juno, and Sword beaches. The German high command was thrown into confusion. Was this the main assault, or was it the feint? The evidence from Normandy was overwhelming, yet the intelligence from their most trusted sources, cultivated over years, pointed unwaveringly to the Pas de Calais. And the agents kept transmitting. With the Normandy beachhead a reality, their script flipped. Now they reported that the Normandy landings, while serious, were a strategic diversion to draw German reserves away from the true objective. Garbo became particularly bold. On June 9th, 3 days after D-Day, he sent a lengthy, scathing critique of the German response, berating his Abwehr handler for not taking his earlier warnings about FUSAG seriously enough. He claimed his fictional sub-agents were risking everything to provide this crucial strategic insight. Astonishingly, the Abwehr not only believed him, but apologized for their skepticism. The result of this sustained, post-invasion deception was a strategic paralysis of catastrophic proportions for Germany. The powerful 15th Army, with its 19 divisions, including critical panzer units, remained in the Pas de Calais. Hitler himself was convinced the main blow was still to come. For 7 weeks, 7 critical weeks, during which the Allies consolidated, expanded, and broke out of Normandy, these forces sat idle, waiting for a ghost army to materialize from the English mists. The double-cross system had achieved the impossible. It had not just misdirected the enemy before the battle, it had held his most potent forces in place during the battle, making the difference between a contested beachhead and a victorious campaign. The silence in the Pas de Calais was the ultimate testament to the completeness of the British victory in the Shadow War. In the wake of the successful Normandy landings and the Allied breakout, the scale of the double-cross victory began to come into cold, statistical focus. The system was not wound down but maintained until the final days of the war in Europe. Its agents now used to sow confusion about the timing and direction of subsequent offensives like Operation Market Garden and the crossing of the Rhine. The supreme irony of the entire operation was delivered to its architect. In July 1944, communiqué from Berlin arrived via Madrid for Juan Pujol Garbo, the Abwehr, in gratitude for his entirely fictional service and his orchestrated strategic warnings about the main invasion force, had recommended him for the Iron Cross, second class. With sublime British humor and bureaucratic propriety, the matter was put before King George VI, who, it is said, found the situation immensely amusing and granted permission for a British agent to accept a Nazi medal. Pujol's fictional subagents also received cash bonuses and congratulations. The Abwehr was, in effect, decorating and funding its own comprehensive deception. The truth, when it finally dawned on the remnants of German intelligence, was too horrific to contemplate. every single agent they had dispatched to Britain after 1940. Total of some 120 individuals had been either captured, executed, or, in the vast majority of cases, turned against them. Not one had operated freely. Of those executed, 39 were hanged at Wandsworth or Pentonville prisons, their deaths a necessary component of the game, proving to the Abwehr that British security was, successfully, catching the inept while allowing the clever, turned ones to continue their work. The double-cross system had achieved a 100% penetration rate, an unparalleled feat in the history of espionage. The fallout within the German intelligence apparatus was fatal, the catastrophic intelligence failure of D-Day, following years of what was now revealed as poisoned information, was the final blow for the already beleaguered Abwehr. Admiral Canaris, long suspected of disloyalty and implicated in the July 20th plot to assassinate Hitler, was arrested. The Abwehr was formally dissolved and absorbed into the SD under Ernst Kaltenbrunner in February 1944. Canaris was executed at Flossenburg concentration camp in April 1945, just weeks before the war's end. The once proud service that had boasted of its secrecy had been hollowed out from within, its every secret laid bare to the enemy, its final contribution to the Reich being the decisive misinformation that sealed its fate. With the end of the war in Europe, the double-cross system didn't simply cease, it was sealed shut under the thick, opaque varnish of the Official Secrets Act. The agents, handlers, and planners were dispersed, sworn to silence. Some, like Duško Popov, Tricycle, returned to international playboy life. Juan Pujol, Garbo, fearing Nazi reprisals, was given a new identity and quietly resettled in Venezuela. J.C. Masterman, the Oxford Don who chaired the 20 Committee, returned to academia. The operational files, thousands of pages detailing one of the war's greatest intelligence triumphs, were locked away in MI5's archives, classified for what was assumed would be perpetuity. For decades, the public history of the war included only vague references to deception, while the true scale and mechanics of the human deception, the turning of every single agent, remained a closely guarded state secret. This secrecy served a profound purpose in the new Cold War landscape: the methods of running double agents, of building credible legends, of forensic letter checks and radio fingerprinting were not retired, they were refined and deployed against a new adversary: the Soviet Union and its intelligence services, the KGB and GRU. The organizational model of the 20 Committee, the inter-service collaboration, became the blueprint for future counterespionage and deception operations. The fundamental lesson of double-cross, that a controlled enemy intelligence channel is more valuable than a closed one, became a cornerstone of Western counterintelligence doctrine. The ghost of the Abwehr's failure haunted the corridors of Moscow Center, even if they never knew the full story. The world only learned the complete, astonishing truth in 1972, nearly 3 decades after D-Day. J.C. Masterman, with permission from a British government, finally confident the secrets had lost their operational potency, published the double-cross system in the War of 1939 to 1945 *. It was an academic treatise, dry in tone but explosive in content. Here, in stark, factual prose, was the official confirmation, the 100% success rate, the construction of FUSAG, the critical role in D-Day. Historians and the public were stunned. The narrative of the war subtly but irrevocably shifted. The battle of Britain had been won in the skies, but the battle for France had been won, in part, in the soundproofed rooms of MI5 and the fake wireless transmissions from suburban London houses. Subsequent decades saw further revelations. Files were declassified, autobiographies from agents like Popov emerged, the personal stories of fear, ingenuity, and strange loyalty filled in the human canvas of Masterman's bureaucratic outline. The double-cross system transitioned from a classified victory to a historical case study of unparalleled success, taught in intelligence academies and military colleges across the globe. It stands as a testament to a unique moment, when a perfect alignment of organizational genius, technical innovation, and profound understanding of human psychology created a weapon of such subtlety that the enemy never felt its blade, only the growing chill of its own misplaced trust. The final, quiet truth of the operation was that it transformed the very nature of the secret war. It proved that espionage could be not just a tool for gathering information, but a medium for broadcasting a manufactured reality, in turning every German spy. Britain did not merely defend its shores, it weaponized the enemy's faith in secrecy itself, conducting a symphony of deception on instruments provided, funded, and applauded by the foe. The story of the double-cross system is ultimately a story about trust. In the clandestine world, trust is the rarest and most dangerous currency. The Abwehr invested it lavishly in their methods, their networks, and their belief in British vulnerability. That trust was not betrayed by a single traitor or a cracked cipher. It was systematically, surgically inverted, what the Germans believed to be their most secret asset, their eyes. In Britain became a conduit for a falsehood, so complete it shaped the decisive campaign of the Western War. This operation leaves us with a lingering, philosophical chill. It demonstrates that in the mirror world of intelligence, absolute secrecy can be an illusion, and perfect control can be exercised in silence. The British did not shout their victories in this shadow war. They allowed the enemy to whisper their own defeat, line by line, in coded wireless messages. The ghosts the Abwehr sent to haunt Britain were quietly housed, fed a script, and made to perform a play for an audience of one, a German high command increasingly detached from reality. Beyond the tactics and the strategies, the double-cross system stands as a monument to the power of the intellect over brute force, of psychological insight over ideological fervor. It was a victory of management, of patience, and of a deep, almost artistic understanding of narrative. The war's greatest secret was not a weapon or a plan, but a simple, stunning fact. In the dark, every hand that reached out from the continent was met, guided, and turned by a firm, unseen British grasp, and in that silent contest of wills, the boast of secrecy died, not with a bang, but with the steady, relentless tap of a Morse key controlled from the very heart of London.